Welcome to the future of the PC or the Mac, maybe. In this video, we're going to review the reviews. Yeah, we're going all meta in this one. We're going to break down the reviews from 6 different reviewers who have got their hands on the brand new M1 Macs, the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini. Why? Well, because I'm considering one. And I'm considering if I should pick up one of these suckers. And I'm thinking that, like others, you're probably keen to know how these perform in the real world. What's the good, the bad, and the ugly? So that's what we'll be jumping into in this one. If it's your first time here, my name is Pete. This is Studio Live today. My goal on this channel is to help you create, record, and release your best music. But we also cover video and technology because, hey, you need that to create your music. And these new Macs look like they could kind of be a pretty decent studio PC just between you and me. So the format of this one, we're going to go into a 2-minute crash course on the changes because in case you're just catching up on this, I wanted to make sure we're on the same page. We're then going to summarize these 6 different reviews. I'm going to go through what was said in a quick fire version so you can get caught up if you haven't, like me, spent the last 24 hours watching every single review. We're then going to go into some Q&A and we're going to finish with my verdict. Is Pete going to put an order in for one of these today? Well, you're going to find out. If you're here live and you have questions or comments, when we get to the Q&A section, just put question in front of those and we'll get to it. If you're watching on the replay and you've got comments, then drop those down in the comments section. And if you do get value out of this one today, hit the like button. That is always good. It's a good thing. It's a thing you can do if you get value. If you don't, hey, that's fine too. Let's continue into this. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about the new M1 Mac. So we've got 3 new Macs. We've got a Mac Mini from $699, a MacBook Air from $999, and a MacBook Pro from $1299. Here they are in all their glory. So the new MacBook Air is the entry level. It is fanless. It is running the M1 chip. There's 2 versions with the 8-core CPU and 7-core GPU, or the 8-core CPU and 8-core GPU. If this all means nothing to you, don't worry. We'll get into the nitty-gritty detail and the real-world testing stuff in this in a moment. But the thing to keep in mind here is that this is brand new. This is a system on a chip, an SoC architecture, which means that everything is integrated. Yes, that does mean that there is no upgradability in any of these, even in the Mac Mini that we'll look at in a moment. And there's no touch screen on any of this stuff. We're talking computers. We're talking Mac, and they all run the new Mac Big Sur. So there's your Air. We have we've also got the Air. I've got the same 2 there. There's the new MacBook Pro, which is a new 13-inch, again, running the same sort of deal. The key difference between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. MacBook Pro has the touch bar, which is that little thing underneath the screen that you may have heard about or read about or used if you've got a MacBook Pro. It has a slightly larger battery for longer battery life. The screen is 100 nits brighter, and it's got, that's about it. So there's not a whole lot of difference, and it has a fan. So that's about the difference between your MacBook Air and your MacBook Pro. So as we'll get into the reviews, you'll find out that what most folks are saying is that really, unless you're doing like rendering or 3D stuff or like high workload, the MacBook Air is running the same chip with the same processors and the same memory or the same storage configurations. So you may want to consider that. Next in line is the Mac Mini, which is, again, exactly the same again. It's basically the MacBook Pro with the exact same specs as that. It's got the fan, it's got everything, but of course it doesn't have a screen or a keyboard because it's designed to plug into a screen. And this is the one that caught my eye because I'm looking for a desktop replacement and I thought this one might be cool. So yes, 3 new Macs starting from $699, the system on a chip. The limitations, it's that all these only have 2 Thunderbolt/USB 4 ports. As I said, they're not upgradable in any way. They can run some iOS apps, sort of, a bit. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. And the battery life and performance are the things that everyone has been losing their stuff about in recent times because, yeah, there's a lot of hype around how these are performing and how good the battery life is compared to previous models. So let's jump in and talk about these. My original opinion after watching these. So I spent probably 5 hours watching, listening, reading, researching. And yeah, the thing is that all these reviewers got these early. So they were all under embargo. And then about 30 hours ago, all of these reviews dropped. Like they all obviously had filmed their reviews, they had them all ready to go, they were in the can, and they all hit live or they all hit release at the same time. So these are all your tech journalists who were given by Apple. And Apple have done some interesting things this time around. They've given interviews to some of the tech journalists and some of the tech YouTubers, and they've actually provided demo units to a more diverse range of people, shall we say. And we're going to go through some of those here in a moment. Some of them were unwatchable, so I've picked out the 6 that I thought were the best value that actually got to the point, cut to the chase, which is what we like around here. And all seem to be focused on benchmarking and comparing these Macs to previous Macs and benchmark, which I guess is good. But my caveat with this, my takeaway is we still haven't had a real user in the real world using these for actual music and video creation applications. So maybe at the end of this one, you're going to say, well, Pete, you better go out and buy one so that you can take one for the team and let us know how they really go. Let's jump in. So my first reviewer number 1 here, is someone that I've been following for some time, probably my favorite Apple guru. Let me know if you're a fan as well. I know I can see Jade Star here talking about these. In fact, I'll throw the comment here. Jade says, apparently Rene Ritchie, who is the bloke that you're looking at there, hasn't had to charge both of his Mac Air and Mac Pro after 5 days of use. Yeah, so if you watch the review, which I've got linked, by the way, all of these reviews are linked down in the description. These are all tech reviewers that I like or that I've just discovered in some cases. But Rene Ritchie, if you're into your Apple stuff, he covers iOS, he covers Mac. If you're into your tech and your hardware, then yeah, follow Rene Ritchie. He does a very good job. So he did an M1 benchmarks and experience of all 3. And there were some interesting things that Rene Ritchie found, which I'm going to jump into here. So he used Geekbench 5, which is what a lot of these reviewers used, and the M1 basically crushed everything. Even things like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the Intel version, the M1 actually did better in a lot of these benchmarks, which is a bit ridiculous when you think about it. The 16-inch MacBook Pro fully spec'd out, you can spend, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, and this is like a little, $1,300 upstart MacBook, and it's crushing. So Rene went into all of his pros and cons about it. A lot of them were pros. Look, he's an Apple guy, and he's going to have a lot of good things to say about Apple. He likes to use Apple. It was amusing. One of my favorite things in the review was he says, the only reason to not get an M1 and to get the old Intel, if you need a space heater for your room or you want to keep your coffee warm on top of your old Mac Mini. So if you were using something like the old Mac Mini, what he was saying is when he was reviewing these and he was doing the same test on the old versus the new, the old one, the fan was kicking in, it was heating up. Like anyone that's used some computers where they're really pushing hard, the fans will spin, they'll be loud, they'll be hot. So that's one of the things that I thought was kind of fascinating and interesting about Rene Ritchie's review. The battery stayed way more charged during testing. So the battery life for the performance you're getting is much better. Again, because Apple are using their own custom silicon, their own system on a chip, they've got more efficiency within the chip. It means that they can control things a lot better. They're not shooting data around between different buses and into a separate RAM modules, separate graphics processing, separate CPU. They're all in the one spot. He did talk about the 720p webcam. So this is probably the biggest disappointment. You'll see this throughout all of these reviews, but the 720p webcam was something that all of these folks talked about. They haven't upgraded that webcam in a long time. Now, the new system has new signal processing, ISP, image signal processing, which is apparently slightly better, but not revolutionary. So if you want really good webcam results, you'll still want to plug in your old Logitech C922 or Brio that I'm using here to get better quality. One of the things that Rene said that was a real standout was that there was a lack of wait time, so there was none of the beach ball stuff. Everything just happened. It was snappy, it was instantaneous, and many of these reviewers compared it to an iPad experience. And again, that makes total sense because the system on a chip, Apple have been developing the A series chips. We're A14 now, so they've been developing those A chips for a long time. So M1 taking a lot of the learnings from the A series chip is not very surprising at all. And yeah, they're brand new machines, and they're a new thing. And what Rene was talking about a lot, we'll finish on this, is that it's the quality of life. And this is what actually resonated with me. Knowing that Rene Ritchie, he's worked for big corporate, he's now an independent creator, he's doing the stuff that I'm doing. So he's needing machines that can actually do for video creation and for content creation. So for him to say that this is going to improve his quality of life because he's not going to be waiting around for things to happen, because that's a really frustrating thing for anyone, for whatever purpose you're using, waiting for something to load, watching that beach ball spin. None of that is good. So, yeah, that is the Rene Ritchie review. He was obviously very happy about it. He was also on Mac Break Weekly. I've linked to that down below if you want. So if you want to watch this review, this is 14 minutes, and it's 14 minutes well spent. If you want to see the longer version, where he talks with Leo Laporte and other folks, you can check out Mac Break Weekly. Those are all linked down below. Let's move on. Yes, my boy, Tong, Brian Tong, someone I've been following for a very long time. Used to be with CNET back in the old CNET days. I used to listen to the CNET podcast, their daily show. I can't remember what it's called now. Buzz Out Loud. There you go. Buzz Out Loud. So with Tom Merritt and Molly Wood and Brian Tong. So Brian Tong's someone I've been watching and following for a long time, knows his stuff, and he's more of a real world user again. So I'm trying to focus in on more of the real world users as opposed to the companies. I watched a couple that will remain nameless that were very focused in on just kind of selling it. Like you can tell they were just, the music in the background, and here is the new M1 Mac from Apple. It does this. Yeah, we don't want that. We want, hey, is this thing going to work for you? So again, Brian did very similar sorts of tests using Geekbench 5 and some other ways to check it out. And he compared the 16-inch. So this is where that costing came in. He said that his $4,500 spec'd out MacBook Pro 16-inch versus a $1,700 MacBook Pro 13-inch. So about a third the cost. And yeah, guess what won all the benchmarks? The new M1. I know it's crazy. The interesting thing here, so you may be asking the question, as I have been, that the new M1 means completely new processor, completely new architecture, right? So does that mean that none of my old apps will run? Well, there is something they've implemented called Rosetta 2, which is the compatibility mode that will run the old Mac applications. So things like Premiere Pro that Brian was talking about uses the old Intel x86 processing. However, when he did the benchmarking, even running through the Rosetta 2 compatibility, it ran faster than the comparative Intel chips. So that's pretty damning, or good damning in a good way. So Brian went through a few tests there, exporting video tests, the Premiere Pro test I just talked about, and also around the battery life. So he had similar things to say around the battery life, which is that it was lasting a long time. Apple have said 20 hours on their MacBook Pro for like basic video watching. What I've been hearing and from real world use is it's the 15 to 17 hour, but it's going to last you all day. You're not going to have to be looking for a power outlet. So when we are all able to leave our homes again on a regular basis, that's going to be pretty cool. Brian also talked about the 720p webcam and the image signal processing and said he wasn't a huge fan of that. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind, that you're not going to want to use this webcam for everything. Jade has got a comment here that, DaVinci Resolve, another video editing app, have already dropped a beta of their very popular and free video editing software, an M1 version, to the public. So they're wanting to get on the front foot with that, no doubt. As Jade says, the single core results on the M1 are mind-blowing. Yeah, if you want to get into the details, I'm trying to sum it all up and bring it real world, but if you want to get into the geeky stuff, check out these reviews. As I said, they're linked down below, and you can check them out. One thing is the iOS apps. We'll talk about that in the next couple of things, but Scott here says so many apps have been built around touch interface. Some devs have already released Mac versions of apps, and all devs can opt out. Very good point, and something that we'll touch on here before we jump into the next review, which is, yes, exactly that. These can run iOS. Might have buried the lead a little bit there. They can run some iOS apps, but here's the thing. The iOS app developer can opt out. Some that have already opted out are things like Instagram. They do not want you to have a non-mobile Instagram experience for whatever reason, because they're Facebook and they want you to be on your mobile device. And a lot of other apps, so a lot of other apps that use the web experience they want to keep using the web on your Mac. So things like video streaming apps, for instance, when they use it through a browser, they can throw cookies around, they can track a whole lot more information about you, your habits, what you're doing. If they let you use a mobile app on your Mac to watch, I think HBO Go was one of them, things like Hulu and Netflix and those sort of things, then they're probably going to back themselves into a corner. Michael Cortez says, thank you, I'm planning on saving for an Apple product and get started in music production. Yeah, and look, one of the main reasons I want to get a Mac is to kind of compare the difference between iPad and Mac, because I've used iPad and I use GarageBand on iPad. I've never owned a Mac. I know that sounds sacrilege. People are like, you're really big into your Apple. I was saying to Jade just before this stream that some people may just come on here and like not like this because they think I'm an Apple fanboy and like, oh, you would say that they're good because you're an Apple. I've never owned an Apple Mac. This is tempting for me to buy my very first Mac. So we will see how that all goes. LumaFusion is another one. Yes, exactly. So Jade Star's talking about LumaFusion, which is what I use. Believe it or not, every single video you see on Studio Live today is edited on this. My iPhone XS with its pink cover and everything. And yeah, it hopefully you believe that my videos are pretty good. Otherwise, you potentially wouldn't be here and wouldn't be subscribed to the channel. So yeah, you get really good quality apps on the iOS environment, and the fact that we have this and we've got a second there that LumaFusion works well on an M1. So yeah, we'll be talking about that. And in fact, I think that's our actual next review here. Talks about iOS a little bit. They do. So let's jump into our next review. And this is from a provider that I follow quite a lot, and that is The Verge. There they are. So they have a review there on the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. So they had two of their reviewers kind of doing a shootout between the two, which I thought was really fascinating because here's where I'm at, right? I use mostly stuff here in this studio. So at first I thought Mac Mini all the way. And then I thought, but wait a minute, a MacBook Air with no fan, how good would that be? Like complete quietness in my studio, no fans running on my desktop. I could just get a Thunderbolt dock, plug it in. Maybe I go that way. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to go MacBook Air anyway, maybe I go MacBook Pro, because maybe I'll regret that in a couple of years that I don't have that additional power for processing, for rendering. So yeah, this is where I was at, and this is why I checked this one out. So this is The Verge, as I mentioned. I'll come back over here to my notes. So they talked about the fact that both of them are pretty amazing. The chips, so the types of chips that they're using are very similar to the iPhone and the iPad. Like they're very much built around that A14 architecture, really focused on speed and battery life. And the ARM processors are completely different to Intel. So they basically went through the whole, yes, this is different. This is not an evolution. This is indeed a revolution this time around. And again, The Verge are not really a Mac. They're not an Apple-centric website, not an Apple-centric review. They do a lot of different stuff, and they came into this and said, we were skeptical. We wanted to say this is first gen, it's cruddy, it's not going to work. And they were surprised. So they said that, yeah, when they were trying this, again, similar to what Rene Ritchie said, MacBook Pro fan only comes on when it's really pushing, and yeah, running Intel apps on ARM, so things in the Creative Cloud via Rosetta 2 was working as well, if not better than, on an actual Intel chip, which is kind of ridiculous. So all the concerns that I had and that most folks had, which is if you're running older apps and older software, will they run on this? Now, as I say with everything, if you have mission critical apps that you use on a daily basis for your productivity, for your business, it's not a good idea to jump over to Big Sur, the new Mac OS operating system, or a new M1 notebook, M1 Mac right now. But it's worth considering. And the thing is, if this is M1, imagine what M2 is going to be. So yeah, if you're not in a hurry, I would sit back, grab a big box of popcorn and just watch and see what suckers like me, I mean, see what people like me that go out and buy the first gen, see what we do. Because I'm usually that person. I'm usually the one sitting back waiting, seeing what happens. I'm super tempted to be a bleeding edge early adopter for kind of the first time. Now, the Verge pointed out something, which is that this doesn't have its own graphics processor. So a lot of pro creators have been coming out and saying, well, unless I can put 32 gigabytes of RAM, because these things are capped at 16, you can't put any more and you can't upgrade it. It's all integrated. So unless I can put 32 or 64 gigs of RAM, unless I can put in a big beefy graphics card like separate AMD or an NVIDIA graphics card in there, then it's not for me. Like, I don't want that. And yeah, that's probably going to be the case. I think what you'll see over time is that this is kind of first iteration. This is MVP for those in the lean and in that world, is like, it's the minimum viable product, right? It's what you're doing. They've gone out, they've had a sprint, they've got their first models, they're putting them out there. They'll see how they go. Next model, it'll be different. Be interesting. Now, they mentioned Chrome in this one because Chrome is notoriously a battery hog, like when you're running Chrome tabs doing a bunch of different things. And this is what I want to see. So The Verge, we're on the verge of, pun intended, getting into the real world stuff. So if you're a real world user, check this review out mostly because they talked about using Chrome and they talked about the battery life and what that is. And that's what I want to see. I want to see the next level, which is people that have actually paid for these. And I know it's not that different. These are still people like their reputation's on the line, but they didn't buy these. They got given these by Apple to test out for a few days. We're not yet there with the real world users. So once we get the real world users, that's going to be a good thing, yeah. So they talked about the difference again between the Air and the Pro, and we've already talked about that. We've got the the mic and the speakers are different. I don't think I mentioned that up front, but you've got the touch bar, touch bar. You've got the slightly brighter screen. You've got the slightly better mics and louder speaker, bigger battery for that heavier processing, and you've still got the fan in there, and the webcam is still awful. So they talked about the webcam. Now, iOS, they did touch on iOS apps, and they basically said iOS apps work, but they're clunky. So yeah, your mileage may vary depending on the app. So a couple of things that a few folks here in the chat have already said is that app developers can opt out. So by default, all apps in the iOS App Store are available to install on your Mac M1. Developers can opt out and say, no, we don't want you to do that. Apple's own apps are those ones. So as we suspected, it seems, and again, I haven't seen this with my own peepers, but it seems that GarageBand, iMovie, these apps from the iOS version are not going to be available on your Mac. And that makes sense because they have Mac versions of those apps, which are, in theory, more full-featured. So why would they allow it? But still a bit disappointing. But things like LumaFusion is working, and a review we'll talk about in a moment actually showed LumaFusion running there. So if you're looking to get this because you're like, oh, maybe I'll get an iPad, but oh no, now that the Mac runs all the iPad apps, I'll just get a Mac. It's not going to be the same seamless experience because you don't have a touchscreen, you don't have a gyroscope, you don't have GPS. There's a lot of differences between a portable device like an iOS device, an iPad, and your Mac. So keep that in mind if that's what you're doing. Oh, I hope you're having fun. Like again, this is me having a talk to myself, and I thought there's probably enough people out there that are in the same boat as me. And I'm like, I'm going to do the grunt work. I'm going to do the grunt work for me. Hopefully, I can do the grunt work for you. So if this is helping, either make your decision one way or the other, or just interesting for future consideration, definitely let me know. Alrighty. And as Tom says here, yeah, they've been using these chips in iOS devices for years, so it's not surprising that things actually work pretty well off the bat. Exactly. When people say, this is bleeding edge technology, this is brand new, this is first generation, yes, it is, but it's kind of not. Like, this is basically the A15 chip, if you want to look at it that way. So it's so similar to the iOS architecture and the iOS infrastructure that they've been using for years, it's basically like A15 instead of M1. They've just labeled it M1 because it's the first Mac and they like to do things like that. So, yes, Scott's saying we need a app compatibility matrix. Yes, we do. And again, because I know many of you are iOS musicians and iOS music users, yeah, things like your iSymphonic, your AUM, your audio units that also have Mac versions. And I talked about this with Patrick on GarageBand Weekly last week, that the reason that developers are not going to want to open up GarageBand iOS and other iOS recording platforms and all these plugins is plugin developers have versions for iOS that are usually 3, 4, 5 times cheaper than the Mac alternative. So you look at someone like Clevegrand, their iOS apps are $7.99, $9.99, $14.99. Their same version on Mac and PC are $29.99, $49.99. So that's going to be that different thing. It'll be really interesting to see how that one plays out. So if you have opinions and questions, we will get to a proper Q&A section. But I thought as we're going through, if folks are having opinions, we will try and throw a few up. Let's move on. Let's check out someone who I've only just discovered. And when I say discovered, I was told I was told by Patrick about this channel. And it's weird that there's technology channels with nearly 1 million subscribers, but there are so many of them now that there's some that I just don't have visibility of. The Tech Chap. He did an interview with a couple of folks from Apple, which was really interesting. He actually asked some legitimately good questions, not just the whole pandering type questions. So that interview, you can see that's like 3 videos ago, but his most recent video, not surprisingly, was this one. which is all about the M1. And he reviewed the MacBook Pro M1. This is huge. Yes, of course. And if you look at, I don't have the thumbnails here, but it's funny that all the thumbnails are like them. Oh, ooh. If you lined up like all the 6 thumbnails of all these, like most of them, it's like the person holding it going, wow, or mind blown. So, hey, we're YouTube creators. We need to do those sort of things. It's all about the click, right? Get that click through. And yeah, without being clickbait, right? Alrighty. So the MacBook 13, MacBook Pro 13, and the Tech Chap here opened up by saying he knows it's cringy, but this is indeed revolutionary. So he did a bunch of tests. He did some YouTube playback tests, Zoom call, gaming, and what it basically worked out is that when he did the same test side by side with the Intel and the M1, that the battery life left was about double. So I can't remember the numbers, and I should have noted them here in my notes. But basically, if the Intel one went down to 40%, the M1 went down to about 70% with the same workload over the same period of time. So all of these are saying battery life is epic, but you're not reducing performance. In fact, you're increasing performance whilst maintaining or improving battery life, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, the performance compared with the old MacBook Pro and a Windows laptop. Again, talked about the Rosetta 2 and the fact that that was working beautifully. The Intel fans were super loud, so there was some really good audio and video of the Intel fans here, but the M1s didn't kick in at all. In a lot of the tests, they did, even the ones with fans, the MacBook Pro, the fan just doesn't kick in. Because unless you're doing, as Rene Ritchie said, unless it was sort of 10 minutes plus of actual heavy workload, he wasn't hearing the fans at all, which is pretty cool. The webcams, apparently, they have better white balance, faster autofocus with their image signal processing, but again, a disappointment. So the consensus, if you want a consensus on the webcam, it's a disappointment. I forgot to mention too that Rene Ritchie, honestly, Rene Ritchie's, if you're going to watch one review, spend 14 minutes and watch Rene's review because it is the most comprehensive, to the point, with the most level of detail. And he actually did some real world tests with a bunch of different ones. He used all the different range of Macs for the last sort of 5 years and did a webcam and a microphone test. So the actual microphones. And the new ones, I mean, they bandy around words like studio quality, which probably is, for someone who's just doing Zoom calls, they're like, hey, this studio quality microphone sounds pretty good. And they do. But obviously for those of us that are used to using condenser microphones and audio interfaces and mixers, it's not studio quality as we would gather. Don't throw away your AT 2020s and your Steinberg and your Focusrite interfaces because you're just going to use your MacBook Pro's mic. It's not going to work that way. I think, as I said last time, and until you see Celine Dion with a MacBook Pro on the mic stand singing into it, yeah, maybe stick with your microphones. Why do I keep picking artists that... Anyway. All right. Let's move on. So yeah, definitely check out, and thanks to Patrick over at the GarageBand Guide for putting me onto the Tech Chap. Very balanced, very level reviews. Again, I picked out these reviews in particular because so many of them were just either super cringy or yeah, just didn't get to the point. And speaking of getting to the point, let's get to the point and get to our next review. So we have here, again, another channel, and thank you to Jade Star, who is one of our wonderful moderators and is here in the chat here, that put me onto this one. So this is the Everyday Dad. And I thought, hey, I'm an everyday dad. I want to check this out. And because, again, I was focusing on as many real-world tests. I didn't want to go to the big guys. I didn't want to find out I knew all the specs at this point, so I wanted real-world tests. And Jade put me onto this one because he actually showed LumaFusion being run in iOS, which is something I did want to see. So, interestingly, the Everyday Dad said dislikes are nothing. So he said he likes everything about the Mac Mini, and he was reviewing the Mac Mini, so I thought this was interesting to check this one out. What he dislikes is nothing. If anything, it was the I/O, so having a media reader, a card reader, something like that. Additional USB ports might have been cool, and you can't upgrade the memory. So for some folks, that's going to be something that they'll be concerned about. But again, and we'll talk about this at the end, the memory situation that I was nervous about, that they can only have 8 gig or 16 gigabytes of memory, that's being proven to not be an issue, or at least not be the level of issue that we thought could be with these. So, yeah, so the $700 Mac Mini, in all the tests that were being run here, again, was comparing it with the Intel MacBook Pro, and it was just trouncing it. It was just leaving it in the dust. So that's interesting. And the one thing that he did point out in the review was that, yeah, certain power apps. So if you are using Final Cut Pro and you're rendering out 4K, 8K video, and you've got this workflow that's just working perfectly for you, would you switch over? Would you get rid of your dedicated graphics processor with 64 gigabytes of RAM that you bought a year ago to buy a new M1 that's kind of a cut down version? Probably not. You would probably wait until the next generation of these, because there's undoubtedly going to be new iMacs, new iMac Pros, new Mac Pros, new MacBook Pros coming down the pipeline in 2021, 2022. So this is really more for, I think this is, and they mentioned it in their keynote, I think these devices are for people exactly like me. PC user for life so far, only because I couldn't get something that was decent value, that had a low barrier to entry, and had equal or better performance than the PCs that I've been using. We are at the point now where I think we're at the threshold where, because Mac Big Sur has become so much like iOS, because I feel much more comfortable about these, and because they're going to run some of my iOS apps, and you're going to get the performance, and they don't cost a fortune, it's right at that cusp. So again, you can tell me at the end of this one, you get to decide what I buy. Well, not really, but kind of, because I'm probably putting an order in very, very soon. Really good point here from Jade. Every reviewer had the 8 gigabyte model and they killed it. The days of RAM are over. That's a really good point, is that every reviewer I saw, and thank you for mentioning this, I did mean to mention it up front, every review I saw was using base models. So the MacBook Airs that they were using were even the 7-core GPU versions, like the absolute bare bones, and they were still killing it. So I think Apple did something really smart here, which is that they knew that they were giving these devices out to people. They knew that they'd be criticized if they spec'd them out and made them the biggest spec. So they gave the bare bones base level, and they still managed to crush it. And again, benchmarks are one thing. Opening up 10 Chrome browser tabs and having 10 different web apps running at once is another, but we will see. We'll see how we go. The more I talk, the more I think I have to just take one for the team and buy one, right? And Ed asked a very good question. Is it the end of Wintel? What Windows and what Intel do from here will be very interesting. If this takes off, if this explodes in the way that I think it has potential to, and people like me start switching, what's it going to take for me to switch back? I don't know. Like, it needs to be something similar to this. It needs to be a low cost, low power, low energy, high performance chip. And who's going to come together? Are Microsoft and Intel going to come together on that? I mean, no, because Microsoft and Intel, like, they're too far apart, and Intel have too many deals with too many of the actual providers, with all the system builders. So they need to make sure that they do the right thing by Lenovo and HP and Dell. So yeah, Apple win at the moment because they have control. And that's what they've had with iOS for the longest time. That's why they went to the ARM-based chip. That's why they've made this transition from Intel back to M1 Silicon. Yeah, Windows. So which type of Windows does it have? None. So that's the thing. If you were running out Windows Windows compatibility, which is Boot Camp, I believe. You can tell I'm not a Mac guy. But yeah, you can no longer, like, they've basically left Windows stuff behind. But there aren't too many. Like, there was a time where I was using so many default bespoke Windows apps that I just couldn't switch. These days, everything's in the web app. Like, everything I use on my PC, apart from the Microsoft Office suite, which is on Mac, that's fine, is pretty much a web app. There aren't too many applications that I rely on that are not just a cloud-based app or a web app or a website or something like that. So there you go. And yeah, as Jade Saar says, RIP Bootcamp. It is Dunsky. Alrighty, let's continue on. Good point here from Scott. I predict app prices will increase. I think they'll meet in the middle. Devs will offer one app for all, but will increase their prices to make up for it. Yeah, really, really good point. If we are going to get to the point where there is kind of a universal app, and it's not, the term universal app at the moment is meaning that it can run on the old Intel Mac and the new M1 Mac. It doesn't necessarily mean it can run on the iOS world. But yeah, what app develop? It would be smart for app developers if they make one version of the app that is optimized for touch but can also work with a mouse and keyboard, and then they just sell that at, instead of, like you say, $10 in the iOS app store and $30 in the Mac app store, $20, and you get it for everything. Maybe. Is that going to be the business model? It'll be interesting to see. Alrighty, let's jump into the sixth and final review, and one of my favorite tech reviewers. It is my man Dave Lee. Dave Lee knows his stuff. He's entertaining. He's educated, and he does good videos. And as you can see here, in a day, this one has more than a million views. So 1 million people have already watched Dave Lee's review of the MacBook and the Mac Mini. So you should probably watch it too, or you can just listen to this because it's 12 minutes and I'll tell you all about it in the next 2. So what did Dave Lee do? He said right up front, I'm approaching this with a neutral mind. I don't want to go in there saying it's good, bad, or otherwise. Again, Dave Lee's not a Mac guy. He's not in the Mac fanboy camp and can't really be accused of that. So what did he talk about? He talked about the difference, like the real world applications, what he's actually going to be doing with them. Did talk about things like ports and screens. So this is something that I'm super interested in because, yes, if there's one limitation, if there's one thing holding me back, it's that what I'm using at the moment, I can hook up to 3 screens, granted 1080p screens, because I've got such a crappy old PC with a bad graphics card, but I can hook up 3 screens with 3 separate ports. So I've got a display port, HDMI, and an old DVI, I believe, that I'm running, can't even remember. So I've got 3 ports that I can use for there. The new Macs have only got the HDMI and then Thunderbolt. So you want to run 2 screens on these, on any of them, you'll need to use Thunderbolt for one and HDMI for the other. And you can only run 2, I think you can run 2 4K screens on there, or 3 screens with Sidecar. And someone, Mac, will have to tell me what Sidecar is all about because I just don't know. The key point that Dave made is that this is generation 1. So again, it's only going to improve. It's only going to change and get better over time, but this is Gen 1. It looks the same. One thing that many of them mentioned that I probably didn't talk about as much is that it's exactly the same. It looks the same. They haven't changed. They haven't upgraded the actual look of it or any of the components of it on the external. It's all under the hood. So your MacBook Air, your MacBook Pro, they all look the same. So if you come over here and you look at these 13-inch MacBook Airs look just like the Intel 13-inch MacBook Airs. The MacBook Pro, that's the MacBook Air again. The MacBook Pro look just like the MacBook Pro 13-inch with Touch Bar, and the Mac Mini look just like the old silver Mac Mini. There's the grey, like the space grey Mac Mini, which was the souped up Mac Mini that did have more ports and did have more expandability, but the new one here is definitely the cut down version, at least from a ports point of view. So back to Dave Lee. He talked about graphics. So he's speculating that this is just the first run and that they'll bring out more that are going to have sort of dedicated graphics, the ability to upgrade to more RAM and potentially, standalone graphics processors and a lot more ports and options. So this is definitely not for the pros. Again, I keep saying this, but I want to reiterate that if you're already running a MacBook, this isn't for people that are already running a MacBook Pro, to be honest. Even though that's the people that are reviewing them because that's who got the new versions, I don't think they're going to race out. Brian Tong, who we talked about 3 reviews ago, said he's not trading in his MacBook Pro 16-inch. That's his workhorse. That's the thing that he uses to get stuff done every day, to something that's got cut down ports and has integrated graphics. For now, anyway. But maybe when the next version comes out, there'll be something that will work. So Dave's review, Dave Lee, was very positive. Did the benchmarking, showed that the M1 was actually crushing and defeating in all of them, and basically said that the only thing is that if you are stuck in the world where you want to upgrade your hardware, you want to have complete control, you want to be able to swap out a CPU, add some RAM chips, upgrade your storage, you want to do it all yourself, these new generation Macs are not for you. And interestingly, I won't go into details on Mac Break Weekly, I also have linked down in the description, but they were talking about exactly this as well, that this is not for those people that want to have complete control. This is a consumer product for the consumer market, and most people are not looking for any of that. Most people just want a device that works. And the older I get and the more that I use tech, the more I fall into this category. I used to be hobbyist number 1, like card-carrying member of the Let's Build Our Own PC club. What's been happening in recent times? I just want stuff that works. When I buy a mixer, an audio interface, an iPad, I just want something that works. When I use software, I want it to be simple. If it can have one dial instead of 5, I want one dial. And it's kind of the same here. When I think about the limitations, it's because in the past, I wanted to plug in a bunch of stuff. So I'm trying to think here, like, okay, if I want to set up a studio with a MacBook Air, let's just say I'm coming in and I want to set up a studio. What do I need to plug into that? Well, I need my audio interface. Well, that's okay. We've got Thunderbolt USB 4 ports. You can plug in your audio interface. What else do you need? Mouse, keyboard. You can use Bluetooth for them. You've got the built-in keyboard on there. That's fine. What else do you need? USB storage. Okay, fair point. You got another USB drive for that. What else do you need? What if I want to plug in something else? Get a Thunderbolt dock. $40. Buy yourself a Thunderbolt dock, and then you can have all the different ports and just plug into one Thunderbolt port. And then this is what I'm getting excited about. Imagine your studio, because the reason that I've been saying for a long time, the reason I say that the reason my studio is that this goes into my backpack and it goes everywhere with me. Now, this is a 11-inch talking MacBook. This is an 11-inch iPad Pro, and I love this. A 13-inch MacBook Air, not going to be much bigger, is it? And it's going to potentially, for some users, do a lot more for them. And then for me, imagine if I'm out and about and I'm using my MacBook Air, and then I'm creating in GarageBand, or I'm editing on LumaFusion iOS, even whatever I'm doing, and I've got a Thunderbolt dock sitting here, and I bring my laptop back in after going out and setting up my live stream. I plug it in here, I load up StreamYard, and then I'm streaming out to you because my Thunderbolt dock has my webcam plugged in, it has my mixer plugged in, and my audio is just all set up. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty compelling sort of thing. And then you might say, well, then, Pete, what do you do with your iPad? Like, why do you then need an iPad? Why do you need an iPad and a MacBook? And that's the problem I'm having right now, is that why do I need an iPad and a MacBook? Maybe I go the Mac Mini because this is my studio. And maybe I just keep everything here plugged into my studio and that's it. Because then all I really need is my webcam and my mixer, and everything else is kind of optional extras at that point. I don't potentially need a whole lot more. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think, because we're about to dive into the Q&A section here to finish off. So I do want your questions. I do want your comments, because we're going to have a chat here for about 15 minutes about this. And then I'll give you my final verdict and which direction I think I'm going. Because as you can tell, I've watched all this stuff. I've spent 5 hours watching all of these reviews, reading every article, and I'm still on the fence. But here's the thing. I'm less on the fence about whether to pull the trigger on this. I'm more on the fence about which way to go. So if there's one criticism here, Apple, you've given me 3 options that I can't decide between. I'm overwhelmed with choice. You brought out one MacBook Air, I would buy it. I would probably have already ordered it. But you brought out 3 things, and now I have to choose between them. It's the old thing that you give consumers too many options, and they just get hands in the air and they walk away and get nothing. So we'll see. We'll see what we end up with. Alrighty, let's come over to some folks here. So we've got plenty of folks with lots to say. Is it easy to game on? They did do some gaming tests, and yeah, it's come across pretty well by the sounds of it. Can you run Windows on a new Mac dual boot? No. So gone. So not Bandcamp. Help me out here. We just talked about it before. The ability to run losing my words here. Yeah. Universal apps, that's probably where it's headed. Yeah, I agree. I think so. And yeah, the days of running Windows on a Mac are over. Going to have some coffee from my Studio Live Today coffee mug, studiolivetoday.com/merch. Oh, that's cold and nasty coffee. Let's see what other folks have got to say. Thank you, Alex, for wanting likes on the video. Yeah, if you're getting some value out of this one, please hit the like button. That will help out. So Scott says, I will run through all the tests tomorrow. Plan to see what works and what doesn't work. Yeah, that's a good thing. If you've got one, if you're getting one, please let me know. Email me, pete@studiolivetoday.com. Create videos. Yeah, join the Facebook group. Create, record, release the Facebook group. I want to see a lot of talk, because let's share. Let's share what our experience is. Yeah, and Tom has a really good point here, that Apple haven't been modular for a few years, so that's nothing new. Exactly. A lot of the stuff here, people were losing their mind about Apple not being modular, not allowing upgrades, and only having 2 ports. Guess what? The MacBook Air's only had 2 ports for a long time. The 13-inch MacBook Air has had a 2-port version for a long time. The Mac Mini has had a 2-port version for a long time. So yeah, they're not changing things. They're just not upgrading the pro level stuff. And that's something to keep in mind. Scott says, what I find interesting in the release differences between Logic and GarageBand Mac, are they communicating? So interested in where this will be 6 to 12 months from now. Exactly. So if you missed the memo on that one, there is on Big Sur, which is the new Mac OS operating system, which you can upgrade your current Intel-based Mac to. There is a new GarageBand version, which is added in, should we say, a lot of the loops and the packs and the features and functionality of iOS. So it's kind of a bit of a powerhouse now. I know Patrick has just reviewed it over at the GarageBand Guide. It's got all the sounds now that were missing, but it's got all those additional functions like automation of effects and panning and things that were missing from the iOS version. So the Mac version is becoming quite compelling. And yes, Apple do make it hard. I want all the things. At the moment, there's three things that I want. I finally need to get some AirPod Pro. Like I don't have any Bluetooth headphones. I'm still using wires, and I'm going to have to join the 21st century at some stage and get some Bluetooth earbuds, and they'll probably be AirPod Pro. I do want to upgrade my phone. I'm looking at all the iPhone 12s, but again, I'm confused, Apple. I don't know whether to get the iPhone 12, the 12 Pro, the 12 Pro Max. You've given me too many options, and now my next computer will probably be a Mac. Speaking of which, what actually happened to the whole your next computer won't be a computer, or this is your next computer? Are they now saying this is your next computer, the iPad, except when it's not, because we want you to sell your Macs now? It's a bit different, isn't it? They've kind of switched around on that whole, replace your computer with a tablet thing. I don't know. What do you think? How many GB of RAM would you recommend for a MacBook Air M1? This is a great question, and this is a question that I have for me right now, because I don't know. Like if you look at the ones that all the tests that have been done on the 8GB model, like when it first came out, I thought, all right, well, the first thing you've got to do is max out that RAM. But that is an old world way of thinking. That's an Intel way of thinking where the RAM is pivotal. The RAM needs to be there because it's the workhorse. And if you run out of RAM, you go to your hard drive. Well, hard drives are SSD now anyway. So using a swap file for additional storage and additional capacity is not that bad, because it's not exactly like an old spinning hard drive that has to spin up and is super slow. And the way that the architecture of the M1 chip works is very similar. Again, the reason that the top of the line, my $2,000, 2,000 Australian dollar iPad Pro 2020, which I still cringe a little bit when I think about how much I paid for, the reason this only has 6GB of RAM, and this is the top end, this is the most you can get, is that the way that the chips work, they just don't need it. They don't need that much RAM because the processor and the architecture is so closely designed, so integrated, that it doesn't actually need the additional RAM. Whereas if you think about Intel chips, you had your chip, you had your GPU, you had your RAM, everything was sending packets between each other. Like I'm not a super tech guy, but I understand how it works with the bussing around. And the more pipes you have, the more connections between things, the slower things go. And the more it has to send through, and the more RAM, the more capacity of memory you need. So I say all that to say, I don't know. My latest thing is what I'm probably going to do is so that I can test it out, so that I can take one for the team, I'm probably just going to buy the base model. I'm probably just going to go with the 256 gig of SSD storage and the 8GB of RAM, just to see how it goes and see how it flies. I know I'll never be able to update it, but as Sion says, 8GB, 1.21 gigawatts. 8 gig is the base, but you can get 16 if you want to, 100%. All right, we've got a lot of other comments here. So, Tom Rochelle, get both. Why not have both? Casca a la dos. Why not have a MacBook Air and a Mac Mini? Man, how funny would that be if I went from, having none to never owning a Mac to buying two Macs at once. Boot Camp, that's what it was called. I mentioned it before and then I forgot about it. Metalhead Hippie, hello, thanks for being here. Yes, if you do want to buy some Studio Live Today merch, and coffee does taste better. Jade Star can attest. Coffee genuinely tastes slightly better out of a Studio Live Today mug. Hashtag not really. Scott says, knowing that Apple's rolling out over these 2 years makes me wonder how soon they'll come up with 32 gig, etc. Yeah. Clearly not 2020, and maybe not even 2021. I think they'll give a pretty long lead time on this now. They've basically had a big sprint in 2020. There are so many products out there that are all bleeding edge. I wouldn't be surprised if they sit back for the first half of 2021 and just be a little quiet. Maybe they'll come out with AirTags. Maybe they'll come out with those AirPod Pro Studio Bluetooth headphones, but I don't see significant stuff going out there. Cody Walsh, mid 2012 for the win. Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I'm like, oh, maybe I can buy an older Mac now. Everyone's trading in their old Macs. Maybe not a 2012. Russ says, I think I better justify my 2020 Pro a bit more before I pull the trigger. Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's the thing. It's nothing that you have to do right now. Absolutely. Here we go. So we've got, this is an interesting comment from JMDC. I'm trading in an unopened 12.9 iPad Pro for an M1 MacBook Air. I got it before I knew that between efficiency and performance, Apple chose both. Yeah, there you go. And that's a good way to put it. Between efficiency and performance, Apple chose both. They need you working in their marketing department. I think that would be a cool line for them to use. Let's see. By the way, any other questions that you have, please drop them in. We've got about 10 minutes left for any final Q&A. So if you do have questions, put question in front and I'll make sure that we get to it before there. Hello, Emobot9000. Very cool name. Beat Emobot9000. It's time to throw. Yeah, exactly. Jade says it's time to throw everything we are used to out the window, like gigahertz and RAM. I think so. And here's the thing: I was critical. I was as critical as anyone at the fact that Apple came out and they just had these unlabeled graphs. They didn't really say that they're like it's 3 times faster, it's 1.5 times better. They do this all the time, whether you like it or not. But here's the thing: we're now closer to the real world tests. This is like that was step 1. This is step 2. We're getting closer to real world. Step 3 is when people that pay for them start getting them and using them for their everyday stuff. That will be the real proof. That'll be the test. And I'm pretty confident that it's actually going to work. And again, things like gigahertz of processors and RAM, it all comes down at the end of it. Like I said before, I don't actually care about that stuff if it gets my work done faster. As Rene Ritchie said in his review, and again, if you're just joining us, there are 6 reviews that we've covered in this, because I don't have one yet. I reviewed the reviewers. So there's 6 reviews that we've reviewed in this video, and Rene Ritchie was one that said it improves quality of life. And if there's one thing that I want more than anything, it's to do things faster, quicker, with less frustration, so that I can get in, get done, and then move on with my life to do more, or to spend some time enjoying the finer things in life, whichever you prefer. Doing things quicker, better is what we're all about. Deep Gravity says it's like the SUV versus the sedan. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, it's you can. There's so many different ways that you can compare. Yes. So yeah, Apple opted out of their own program. Yeah. So Apple apps on iOS are not usable on M1 and probably never will be, for the reason that they have their own Mac versions. They're not in the business of competing with themselves, and they would think that for the average user, it would be more confusing than beneficial. If you went into the App Store and you're like, oh, here's GarageBand, I'll download it. You're like, why is this so weird and clunky? And why does it seem to think I need a touchscreen? Yeah, it's because it's the iOS version. So they're probably catering for the 95% of people that want it that way. The 5% of us that would actually love to have GarageBand iOS on a Mac, I would have already bought one. If it wasn't for that point, I would have already bought one of these, because for me, I've got my screen up over here where I've been showing things. If this was a Mac, that could be GarageBand. Like, gone are the days of me having to mirror and use HDMI capture and all this sort of thing. I could be having GarageBand iOS and do tutorials on that using the one computer, using a Mac M1. If I'm doing LumaFusion tutorials, I can do that because it will run. But yeah, not with that. So maybe Cubase's, I don't know. Has anyone checked? Let me know. If you have an M1 Mac in your hand, or if you're getting one, check Cubase's iOS, because I'll be interested. I'll be very surprised if I don't find out that Steinberg opt out, because they sell Cubase. So they have a standalone digital audio workstation on the PC and on Mac. Actually, is Cubase Mac? Someone can tell me. Or is it just PC? Anyway, I don't know if Steinberg would want you running it. And I don't know about Aurea Pro either. So we'll see. We'll find out. 1.21 yeah, you need a bolt of lightning for 1.21 gigawatts. Hello to Martha and Clinton. Hope the new job is going well. It is the new full-time gig. Yes, I'm loving it, mate. Loving being a full-time content creator. It means that I can sit here on a Thursday morning. We're in lockdown here in Adelaide at the moment. You may have seen the news if you're here in Australia, or if you're not. Yeah, we've got a few cases here in South Australia, so we're in lockdown for 6 days. And when I say lockdown, heavy lockdown. I had to dust off the treadmill this morning because I literally can't leave the house even for exercise. Yeah, it's that extreme. Anyway, that's by and by. Let's continue on here. Oh, and thank you, Jade, for the 70. Yeah, I know that blows me away. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to you. This is for you because yeah, thank you. There's 70,000 people that care what I have to say about things that want to listen to me. And I was thinking this before. I meant to make the joke about it, but the reason that I was saying that Rene Ritchie is my favorite review of this is because something about an old dude with a salt and pepper beard, right? Old dude, tech channel, salt and pepper beard. There you go. But what's Rene got? He's got 181,000 subscribers. No, he's doing really well, and he was a good example. Him and Brian Tong used to work for big companies. I think Rene worked for iMore, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and Brian Tong was with CNET. They left, and they've gone out on their own independent and doing an exceptionally good job. Let's find some more questions. Immobot, what would be a good MacBook for producing music? I heard they kind of lag after you add so many tracks. This is what we need to find out. The M1, I want someone to crush the new M1s with a bunch of Logic tracks, with a bunch of plugins and things. It's going to happen. People will get their hands on them and find out. But I think that, yeah, they're going to do well. The new M1 chips are looking like they're going to be pretty darn rocking. So we'll see. Yeah, and follow on from your comment before. Apple chips on iPhone have only needed a third to a fourth of the RAM for Android phones. 8 gigabytes won't get you 60 to 32, but you might be getting your money's worth of RAM performance upgrade. Yeah, so yeah, it's worth considering. Question from Cody. Where did I see you, Cody? You've scrolled. I've scrolled past you. There you go. Yeah. Do you think having a MacBook will tempt you into drive? Yeah. So that. But probably. I will definitely at least do the free trial. Once I finally do have a Mac and I have GarageBand on Mac, I will definitely at least opt into the free trial of Logic, if they're still doing it. I think you had a 30-day free trial. So, yeah, I'll definitely check it out because why not? I might love it. The thing is, I'm not stuck in my ways. I'm open to new things. I think sometimes folks will say to me, why do you use GarageBand? Why do you just use iOS? Don't you know there's better apps on PC? I'm like, I use what I use because it works for me and it works for my workflow. And that's about it. I will try new things. And if I try something new and it's better, then I'll switch to it. And if it's not, then I won't. So it really is as simple as that. And I meant to say this up front. I think if you're a fan of a brand or if you're a fan of a product, that's fine. But if you are a fan of something to a level that is so blind that you can't see when it changes and it doesn't work for you anymore, dare I say it's kind of like everything in life, like politics, like anything that you do. It shouldn't be about you believing in something. It should be about you. Like it's not about them, it's about you. So I'm not an Apple fan just as much as I'm not an IBM fan or a PC fan or a Windows fan. I'm not a fan of a platform. I'm not a fan of a product even. I'm not a fan of GarageBand. I'm not a fan of the iPad. I'm a fan of music. So one of the only things that I'm actually a fan of. And these days, as I get older, I'm a fan of simplicity. I'm a fan of things that make my life easier and that help me get stuff done in the most efficient way possible. End of. Alrighty, let's continue on, and we'll see if we've got any final comments. Yes, sorry to hear that you are semi-locked down in Pittsburgh. Just announced being advised to stay home. Yeah, and look here in Australia, that they've been because in Victoria we had a fairly bad run there for a while. I think as Jade and Deep Gravity and others know that we're locked down for months, that we've got a 6-day lockdown here, which we're hoping will only be for that amount of time. Time will tell, but they've gone very hard very early because they don't want things spreading. Anyway, and Logic has a free trial to use at the moment. Thank you, Benedict, and thank you for being here. And Jade is asking on the Aurea Pro message board what the likelihood of being ported to M1 Max. Look forward to a response. Yeah. Well, yeah, because Jade knows the Aurea developers, and they do have a good community there for Aurea Pro. That is a good question. Alrighty, that is going to do it. I said I'd give you my final verdict. What am I actually going to do? I am leaning more heavily towards buying the absolute entry-level MacBook Air here in Australia. So let's quickly spec this out before we finish up. So if I was going to do this, here's what it would be. I would get this one. I don't necessarily need the extra core. I would be paying $15.99 here. That's the $9.99 US version, $15.99. And I would get the M1 chip with the 8-core CPU, 7-core GPU, 256 gig of storage, and 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now, what is that a good idea? Is that the right idea? Something is telling me that I should upgrade the RAM, or something is telling me I should go to this one actually, because this one has the 512 gig of storage. Will I run short? Well, I don't know. So I'm still on the fence, basically, to say that. So I'm still on the fence with which way that I go. But yeah, in the next month or so, there will probably be a Mac Mini or a MacBook Air, or possibly a MacBook Pro under the John's Christmas tree. We'll find out. And stay tuned to the channel to find out. If you've got your own ideas, your own comments, your own thoughts, you think I should go one way or the other, please let me know. Would love to hear from you. And if you want to support the channel, there's heaps of ways you can do that down in the description. And that support helps me have the ability to actually do things like buy new Macs. So thank you. It is all because of you that I can even consider doing these things. So I do thank you greatly. We've got a big day coming up tomorrow. I'll tell you about briefly. We've got Jakob Hack from Hack Attack. Yes, the synth master extraordinaire. Got an interview with him tomorrow. So tune in for that one. That'll be early afternoon for folks in the US and Canada, evening for the UK, morning time here for folks in Australia. And then we have an early edition of Your Music Live. So please subscribe to the channel. Check out the channel for the times and dates and everything for that. We're right on time here, so I got to go. Thanks, folks. Be kind to yourself and others. Keep creating.